Hello there folks, again welcome back to my YouTube channel. Here I am back in nature. This time a much more pleasant day, quite warmy. Still the soil is a bit chilly, but here I am back in nature with my lunch and with my feet planted on the ground. So I decided to drop a new video, this time shortly on the idea of attachments and why they're not necessarily good. What is technically an attachment? Well, an attachment is any sort of ideas or thought forms that you have created based on an emotional liking. Okay, you have, well, let's not call it an emotional liking, but more like identifying. Okay, you identified yourself with something sometime in the past and you have created kind of a bond. Okay, that's how you can actually take, attachments as a kind of bond. Okay, because they kind of keep you trapped in a certain emotional state, right? And you're constantly making that emotion stronger and stronger. Hence why psychology comes with a point that says every time you remember something, you technically remember the last time you thought of it, not the initial moment. And this has been a case in courts as well, because I don't know how well known it is in an international case, but I've seen a documentary made by a great psychologist, okay, and criminologist. And it was a case of a murder. Okay, someone was murdered from a car, right? A car ran by and someone pulled out a gun from the car and shot at the victim, right? The victim was killed, and there was said to be a suspect, and the suspect was arrested for 10 years. Now, they were liberated a bit before, if I remember correctly, or their sentence was much longer, but they were liberated after 10 years, when the psychologist, made a certain case of their own, right? And they studied all the aspects of the event, right? So the event was, kind of in the evening at 7. At that time, it was already dark, and the authors, right, they shot from the darker side of the alley. Okay, and the only witnesses, right, the children of the uh, murdered person, let's say, they said they clearly identified the face of the criminal, but the mind is very tricky because it can create its own details, especially if it suits its own needs, right? So there was a huge amount of proof that was brought, and even the judge was taken to the place, right? And a person with a fake gun stopped in front of them at the exact distance, and people, the judge actually looked at them and said, hey, how can you actually recognize the face of the person when you can't even see the inside of the car, right? You can't see anything, so you can't see the face of the person. So the person was convicted without actual proof, right? So a bit later it was claimed that the person was released from custody, from jail, right? So if the mind is capable of creating its own details, then one should become more and more knowledgeable of the thousands of layers the mind has, each layer more than capable, right, than screwing over you, especially if you're an overthinker. And what an overthinker is, well, an overthinker is any kind of person who thinks a lot, who goes through details, but the problem is the same details again and again. Okay, this shows attachment, right? So attachment is when you don't want to give up the past. Okay, attachment can also be synonymous to karma. Okay, a word that so many people misjudge and misuse, taking it for the sins that everyone tries to run away from when it comes to Christianity. Okay, because everyone is having these ideas that there is some white bearded fuck up there that has nothing else to do than watch Earth TV and see what you specifically are doing. Okay, not everyone else, not anyone else, it's just you specifically, and of course each and everyone else at the same time. I wonder how and why, just so that they fulfill some kind of power struggle they might have, right? And that power struggle comes as they want to judge you for all the hideous things you've done. But wait, this white bearded fuck is also the so-called god of love, right? So why should you end up hating a so-called god of love, right? So attachment is technically synonymous to the point of karma. Okay, now why that? Because karma means a wheel. okay? It's technically how Westerners would say a cycle, right? Now, what does a cycle mean? Well, cycle means in a way bondage. It means a chain, just like a dog that does some running, okay, but they are chained, right? They have a leash and they're chained to a pole, right? So they can only move at most around the pole, so they just move in circles, right? Or a dog chasing their own tail believing it's the enemy, right? So that's technically a cycle, right? A cycle means when you're constantly doing something and you don't find any exit, right? And this easily leads to expectations, right? That is why people trust the media, trust the society, the governments and the such. But wait, governmental, right? If you trust governmental work, it's not called governmental work for nothing, right? The purpose of a government is to kind of dictate how you should work, right? And of course, it goes hand in hand with social media and any other topics like that, which I don't mind diving into, but not for this video. So the point is, when you're doing things again and again, you're technically stuck in the past, right? Why you're stuck in the past? Well, because you have made a powerful emotional and or psychological attachment towards an event, right? And when that happened, it happened out of ignorance, right? Because ignorance means accepting literally everything without discernment, right? So many people are trying to ignore everything that's pissing them off, right? People are trying to ignore mandatory face masks, mandatory vaccinations, and all sorts of things that happen today, especially thanks to the cunt virus. But the question is, you're ignoring those, but at the same time, you're constantly pissed off by those because you can't outrun that which you constantly ignore, right? You can't outrun that because ignorance means accepting things without discernment, okay? You're not discerning over anything that you accept. You're just taking it as is and, well, you just shut up and swallow, right? Even if, silence is consent, right? And people say, ignorance is bliss, but no one seems to ask themselves whose bliss that is, because I ain't ever seen, happy ignorance, okay? Especially if they are, except when they are, grave cases of psychiatry, right? Because they're suffering a lot and they're finding happiness in that. Okay, that's definitely a case of psychiatry, okay? So, you see, why attachments are technically karma is because karma is basically a wheel, okay? And it means it can even go to an extent like turning your past into your future, right? When you're doing the same thing again and again and again, right, you're always thinking about that specific event in the past again with each and every other layer that you put to it, okay? Like someone angered you, they called you an idiot or some kind of irrelevant name, and you're making a greater and a greater fuss because of that. And it's not that it's just one single event, like so many other events you're thinking of, and they're constantly looping into your mind, right? And these people end up being somewhat vampiric, right? And vampires always live to the detriment of others, right? Why these people are vampiric is because in order to support a certain thought, you need to pay it energy, right? Just like in programming, for example, you always need, resources, right? Everything that happens in programming, in video games, in softwares, when you load your website, right? Every little action is made out of, let's call them, pieces of information. They may be variables, they may be simple ones, they may be complex ones. I call them pieces of data, okay? Structured data, less structured data, right? Functions, whatever, I'm not gonna dive into that, right? But each and every one of these requires a certain amount of space, right? They require a certain amount of memory, else they cannot live. Just like you require a physical body, right? You take up a space in order to be in here, right? You have a certain memory, right? And funnily speaking, karma means memory, right? And of course it is ancestral memory, it is evolutionary memory, it is of numerous types. But again, things are so interconnected, and ignorance kind of disallows you to see this interconnection, and you end up believing that everything is separate. But again, there comes a question: what is a belief? Well, A belief is basically nothing else than accepting things without any necessity for proof, right? So technically this is again a proof of ignorance, right? Because ignorance means accepting stuff without discernment, and a belief means accepting something without a necessity for proof. So basically they kind of coexist, right? So attachment usually, and well, always attachments come from ignorance, right? What about people who are people pleasers? Well, they are people pleasers, okay? People pleasers in the world exist mainly because, and only because, they are ignorant to their own selves, right? They put their own selves at detriment because, well, they are convinced that someone else is much better than them, and, well, that's the case, right? They are irrelevant and everyone else must be helped, but at the same time, with the expectation that they receive something in return, right? Why so many people suffer is because, well, they are doing things that don't serve them, right? So all this being said, hopefully this video was a bit introspective, and it definitely gave you a sense of idea, information, right? It made you a bit more introspective. So all this being said, take care, you are appreciated. Time for my lunch. Have an awesome day. The Ninja on board signing out.